are watching Darasa Online.
Dear students, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Mr. Darcy. I teach English Language 1. Our lesson is about language skills, and we'll look at the two subtopics of speaking and writing skills. So under these subtopics, we are going to specifically study on speech writing and essay writing. Based on those, we are going to be led by our question, or by the question which reads, how can you identify or how can you distinguish a speech from an essay? How can you distinguish a speech from an essay? So with this question, I expect that at the end of the lesson, you should be able to differentiate speech from essays. And you also supposed to know how you can write a speech and how you can write an essay. Maybe before we start looking at these distinctions, let us a bit know what is a speech and what is an essay. A speech, in very brief, we can say it is a formal talk that a person stands before others as he or she is addressing about a certain particular issue or a certain particular subject. But again, it should not be confused that a speech and a lecture, there are two things which are different. So I might stand in front of you here. I am not making a speech. At the end of this class, as I say, we'll be able to differentiate a speech from any other talk, and which, in this case, you need to be able to use those and see how best you can write a good speech. So an essay is just a writing, or it could be a creative writing, or sometimes you can be guided to write some certain presentation. So how to develop a speech? For a person to write a good speech, the first thing he or she has to do is to make sure that he or she has read and understand the subject that he is going to present. So when you have the content of the subject, that is when now you try to look at what are the aspects that a person has to follow to make a speech. So with these aspects, there are the things now that they are going to make the differences between a speech and an essay. Here we go. Aspects of speech writing. Definitely, when you are to write a speech, you must have the subject that you are going to make a presentation. So in this case, we are expecting that you have to start with the title. You have to start with the title, or they sometimes call it heading. What do you have to have in the title? What are the message that we expect to see in the title? So in this case, when you are to write the best title of your speech, you can develop those 3 WH words: what, when, and where. As you are answering those questions, you'll answer a question of what is it that you're talking about? So in simple language, what is your speech about? When answering a question of when, you'll have to talk about the day and the date when the speech is going to be delivered. And finally, you need also to locate the place where this speech will be presented. And that you have covered about the first aspect. The second aspect of speech writing is the audience identification. That you have to identify and or rather acknowledge the people who are there as your audience. This one will depend on whether these people are in groups and or as individuals. In this case, we'll have to identify these audience by looking at their status. Those whose their statuses are higher, they'll be ranked first. And those others whose their status are low, they'll be ranked at the bottom. So for example, if maybe you are making a presentation or a speech, and in that occasion you have the minister attended, you have the member of parliaments, you have executive wards, you have students, and you have commoners. So you'll definitely start with the minister, followed with the member of parliament, to the executive wards, to the village, to the students, and finally to the ladies and gentlemen. So that will depend on, as I say, the kind of audience that you have. Remember, when you are writing these, we don't just write continuously. Even though they are not numbered, but still they will have to occupy different lines. So this is the way your audience have to be written in your presentation. Even if the space on your paper is enough for you to write another audience, but because of their different status, each line should be occupied by by an audience depending on his or her rank. So you cannot include a minister and, let's say, these executive wards or students in the same line, because otherwise they will look as if they are in the same status. That is the reason. Just after audience identification, you have to greet them, because now you are going to communicate to them. So you have to greet, you have to salute. That will depend on which time the speech is going to be made. But we are advised that our greeting should be very, very common. We should not make a greeting that isolate other groups. Like, for example, if you're a Muslim or you're a Christian, making a greeting that segregate other group, that one in speech presentation, because you don't know the kind of audience or the participants that you have, those whose their greeting might not be used, they'll see like they are not wanted. So let us try to make greetings which is common and it accommodates everybody. But if, of course, you want to use those, then you have to use all of them. Like sometimes our former president, Mr. Honorable Benjamin Mkapa, used to greet his citizen by starting with Assalamu alaikum, Bwana Yesu asifiwe, tumsifu Yesu Kristo, and he finishes by mambo. So you find it accommodates all the people in that particular presentation. That is aspect number 3. Aspect number 4 is introduction. So at this point, you'll need, first of all, to introduce yourself, because you have identified your audience. Then they'll start also asking, who are you that are going to talk to them? So if you leave that pace, it's like you're creating a vacuum, which you start people from different angles are murmuring, asking themselves, who is this person? So you'll have to make a self-introduction by mentioning your name and your title as well, because that one will be one among the things which it will make those people to concentrate, because now they see this person who is making the presentation is a person of a certain caliber. But again, under introduction, we are expecting that you also have to introduce the topic. You have to introduce what you are going to say. And under this introduction, you can make it in different ways. You can make it direct, and or you can make it by telling them what is your objective. That at the end of this presentation, what do you want them to achieve? That is aspect number 4. Then just after the introduction, so that is where you go to the main part. That is where you go for the main presentation. This is where you are going to make different points depending on the subject of discussion. And these points will be in form of paragraphs. And we all know that a paragraph normally contains a topic sentence followed by explanation or elaboration of that point, and with example if necessary and or where applicable. But there is a peculiarity on how to write these paragraphs. The first words in your paragraph, when you are writing a speech, it should be words that they are addressing the people who you want this message to go for. For example, if I talk to students and I want a point to be understood and or to go to the students, then I'll start my paragraph by dear students. But if I am addressing it to a member of parliament, I should start with honorable member of parliament. The reason of why I have to address these people is very simple. That you try to draw the attention. If maybe they were doing something different from what you are making there, they will definitely draw the attention by asking themselves, oh, why have we been mentioned here? So that is the reason why we have to make those audience identification at the beginning of every paragraph. And the last aspect in speech writing is the conclusion part. The conclusion in speech writing, there are 3 or 4 things that you can put there. The first thing under conclusion, you should try to summarize the area or the content of your speech. But just after that, you have to give what we call thanksgiving. You know, people have wasted their time. They might have different other tasks to do at their home or at their working places. But they have left everything just to come and listen to you. So actually, to show civilization that you have to make or you have to give a word of thanks by them being attentive and leaving whatever they were doing. In addition, you have to say or to give a word of goodbye. Giving them a well wish as they go back to their home, or as they go back to at the working place, or to resume their other routines. And with that, you'll be done with speech development. Now, as we said, we want to be able to differentiate or to distinguish a speech from an essay. We have just finished seeing these aspects of speech writing. Let's go on the other side of how can we develop essay. How to develop essays. By the way, you need to know that an essay is a composition. It could be a free composition, or it could be a guided one. It could be fictional, or it could be non-fiction. It depends on what were you told to write.
You are watching Darasa Online.
An essay, most of them, I said most, not all, most of them They are said to be having three aspects. The first one is introduction. The first one is introduction. The second one is content. And the last part is conclusion. As I said, most of the essays. But there are some other essays that they have an additional element or an additional aspect, which is the title or the heading. So when you come across with an essay having or starting with the heading, you don't need to be confused saying, what kind of an essay could this be? Now, what we have to have under introduction. Normally, under introduction, this is where the writer is going to introduce what he or she is going to say in his main part. And under the content area, we are expecting to see the points being developed, trying to describe what a person has been asked to do. And in conclusion, all what you're going to write could either be the summary of what you have said, and or rather the opinion of the writer. And it depends on a kind of an essay. One can as well give his point of view on how he sees that thing. Now, those are the things that a person has to use when he or she wants to develop an essay. Now, as long as our question wants us to distinguish and end of the day being able to write a speech differently from an essay based on this explanation, you are obviously going to give me and tell me how an essay can be distinguished from a speech. Let me use these aspects to show you how can you distinguish them. A speech has to start with the title, which under essay writing we have seen only some few kind or some few essays can start with the title. But mostly, as we say, they don't begin with a title. Coming to aspect number 2, where under speech development, you have to have audience acknowledgement. The people who are in that place, which means the speaker and the audience, sometimes they can see one another. So there's face to face. But when you are writing essay, we don't have such element. You are just seated somewhere, you develop your essay. Who is going to read? You can't see him. So this is another aspect that shows how a speech development is different from essay writing. Again, go back to number 3, aspects of salutation. You greet the people who you want to talk to. But in essay writing, who are you going to greet? So we find this aspect is also missed when we are writing essays. Again, even aspect number 4, we don't introduce ourselves when we are writing essays. But here we have seen that a person who has to make a speech, he or she has to introduce himself. Of course, introducing the content area of a speech, we have seen it also being found in essay writing. Under the content part, they both have paragraphs. But how do we develop paragraphs in essays and in speech? We said the time when you want to start a paragraph in your speech development, you must at first identify the audience to whom you think this message is for. As I say, for example, if I'm making a speech to you, I'll definitely start by, dear students, then I go ahead with the other point that I want to make. But in essay writing, we don't have to start with the audience identification. After all, we don't know to whom this message is for. So it is left without audience identification. And the last thing that shows how speech is different from essay, it is on the conclusion part. Under speech development, remember we said the conclusion, it has some certain items, like, for example, you talk about making or giving what we call thanks to the people who are listening. And also you have to wish them as they go back home. But under essay writing, we don't give those. We just either summarize and or we give our own opinion. So in that, under the conclusion in speech development, they share that. When we want to make executive summary or want to summarize the points that were made under speech, and also we can do the same when we are writing essay. So in this, we can see how can a speech be different from a normal essay, and which, as per this time, I believe you are able now either to distinguish a speech from a normal essay, and based or using on these aspects, you can write a speech depending on the title that you have been given. And also, you'll be able, or you can write an essay depending on the topic that you have been given. Remember, at the beginning I said, a speech presented, which means a person has to stand before others. But you cannot ask yourself, why writing? We write a speech as you're going to read before other people. Of course, it's not that you're not allowed to read, but we are advised when we want to make a speech presentation, we need to own the speech, so that not all the time you should be making references to your guiding notes. So you'll need at a time to have an eye glance on a point that you want to present. You don't have to read everything that you have written. So in this case, I want to draw you back to a review case of there are things which are written, but actually they were not meant to be written. It has been prepared, but its intention is to be read before other people. But in simple language, a person has to go and talk to the people. You talk on the things that you know. So one of the very first things for a presenter is for him to have well prepared. And not only being prepared, also to make a practice. So you prepare yourself, you practice on the way how you're going to present, and when you are on the audience now, that is when you have, in most of your time, face your audience as you deliver the speech. Definitely, you need also to be confident. And this confidence comes only when you practice. Because if you don't practice to stand in front of other people, it's very difficult for one to build a confidence. Another thing is you have to use an audible sound or voice. Try to look at the environment where you are, how big it is, how crowded the area is, and try to see how you can make your voice moderate so that people can hear. Because if you talk very slow or very low, you might make other people fail to hear what you say. And in that case, they lose the concentration. So this is very, very important. Again, maybe one point a person might be asking himself that probably it had been forgotten to be spoken somewhere. It is the kind of language that you are going to use. The language that you'll have to use, make sure it is or it contains common core vocabularies. A common core vocabulary is these are everyday words that we normally use when we are communicating. Which again, of course, it depends on the kind of audience that you have. If it is a mixed kind of an audience, then that's where I say use a common core words. But if you're talking to children, let's say, again, you have to look at the language that will make those small kids understand what you are presenting to. There is a great disadvantage of a person using a language which is not common or is not understood to the audience. Because one, his or her message won't be sent. Or it might be sent but not delivered. But again, those people, they will not be able to continue listening. They'll start making other things of their own. That's why we say you have to use the language which is appealing to your audience. Yeah, based on our discussion about speech writing or speech development and essay writing or essay development, let us now examine the questions before you. The first question reads, imagine that you are the tour guide in the Ministry of Natural Resources and Tourism. You have been asked to advertise the tourist areas in Tanzania. Write a descriptive essay about the beauty of tourist areas in Tanzania. That's the first question. The second one reads, imagine that you are the Member of Parliament of Kilosa Province. You have been invited as a guest of honor to mark WHO's Day, World Health Organization's Day, in your village. Write a speech about COVID-19, explaining the symptoms and how it is spread. And the last question we have there is, imagine that you have been invited in a nearby school for a debate competition. Your school has been asked to oppose the motion, which states COVID-19 is as a result of globalization. As a principal speaker, argue against. Based on the skills that I have provided before, if I may, to help, I could simply direct you by saying, the first question, it needs you to write an essay. And from the description I gave you, that this is one of the essay which is going to bear the title. So it will have a title, and the rest of the other remaining parts, as we discussed, things like introduction, content, and conclusion. But remember, the title of your essay, it should be the tourist areas in Tanzania. So in this case, again, I have left you free. I could have added saying, use 8 points. So which means you have to select 8 tourist areas and give the description, trying to explain how beautiful are they, so that it can attract other people from different areas, including the Tanzania citizens by themselves. But when you read to question number 2, it is not the same as the first one. This one does not require you to write an essay, which at the end of the day, it simply tells you that write a speech about COVID-19, explaining the symptoms and how it is spread. So this is about speech writing. So all what you do, you have to follow those steps. You have to use those aspects of speech development. When you read the last one, it does not ask you to write a speech. It neither asks you to write an essay. It simply asks you to argue against. Where do we argue? It tells you you have been invited for a debate competition. So I also wanted to make a conclusion kind of on how we can differentiate a debate from a speech. But the way they have to be addressed, we can say they are more or less the same. There are only some few things that they differ in common. For example, in writing speech, we have to have a title. But in debate writing or debate argumentation, we don't have the title. But audience identification, you have both, though they are addressed differently. And the debate, it has, of course, a common members who normally appear and or who normally attend and who they have to have there for a debate to take place. You have people like the chairperson, the secretary, timekeeper, principal speakers of opposing and proposing sides, members of the floor, and of course, ladies and gentlemen. In a debate competition like this, you might happen that there are some invited other guests. Or you can have people called judges. So it depends. If there are other members who are not in a common way of making an address, they need to be identified. They need to be acknowledged. But all in all, you identify the audience just the same as you did in speech development. So just after that, the salutation goes, which we have them both in speech writing and in debate presentation. Now, when it comes to the introduction, you do the same. You introduce yourself under speech and you introduce your title. But in debate, after introducing yourself, then you have to tell on which side are you going to argue. Are you arguing from the proposing side or from the opposing side? Remember, in this debate, the task is for a person to convince another person to be on his or on her side, to believe and accept the argument which is presented. But otherwise, what comes thereafter, there are points to be made. So the way you address is the same way you're going to address when you develop a speech. And in conclusion, under a debate presentation, normally the speaker has to thank the people who are listening. And if he can, if he wants, he can summarize what he said. But normally, we do not make a well wish to the people as they go back home, because you are not the last person to speak. That will remain to be the task of the chairperson when he or she is going to close the debate session. So by now, I believe that when you are asked to differentiate a speech from an essay, you are able to. And again, when you are asked to go for a debate presentation, marking either the opposite and or the proposing side, you know the procedures. And finally, you'll be able to write a speech just in case you're asked to. And for this knowledge, you're going to apply it in writing good essays in your coming examinations. Thank you very much for listening.